Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. The Supreme Court of the State of Michigan is now in special session.
Be seated, please. Good afternoon, and welcome to this very special session of the Michigan Supreme Court. This afternoon, we are convened to receive the portrait of our much-loved and respected colleague, Patricia Boyle, a member of this court who has touched the lives of everyone in this room and many people across our state of Michigan. When I was thinking about today, I thought that no ordinary welcome would do for an occasion like this. And because Patty and Terry Boyle, and many members of this audience, and myself included, share a love of Ireland, I wanted to extend to everyone in the room today an Irish welcome. Cad Mili Balcha, which means 100,000 welcomes. 100,000 welcomes to you, Patty, and to you, Terry, and to everyone in this room. And I extend 100,000 thank yous to the people who worked so hard to organize this afternoon's event. There's a very long list, and time does not permit me to extend thanks to everyone who participated. But I would like to especially thank and recognize the co-chairs of the event committee, Tom Keenbaum. Where are you, Tom? He must be here somewhere. Let's see him. Mary Masseron-Ross. Hello, Mary. And Reginald Turner. This is a beautiful occasion that you are about to give us this afternoon. And let me at this point call on the chair of the Michigan Supreme Court Historical Society, Wally Riley, who will serve as the Master of Ceremonies. Wally.
Thank you, Your Honor. Madam Chief Justice, members of the court, as always said, I have a split personality, and today it's true. With your indulgence, Chief Justice, we have turned the podium so that the speakers can face the audience. We recently had a program here in which Tom Brennan gave just an exciting and interesting presentation to the court on the history of the court. Unfortunately, his back was to the audience for the entire time. So we thought that today it might be more appropriate as far as the audience is concerned, with the indulgence of the court, that we spun the podium, and we have done that. Thank you. Probably the thing that the Michigan Supreme Court Historical Society has done most effectively and most successfully is had its special sessions of the court to present portraits of justices who have recently retired from the court, and some justices who even have been deceased, and we've gotten pictures and done their portrait. That's been one of our main programs, and no portrait is more important to the presentation of the court than the one we're going to do today for Justice Boyle. And it's my pleasure on behalf of the Society to be able to call on a great number of people who are listed in your program for some remarks about the court, and more particularly about Justice Boyle. So let me begin with somebody who is much, much too young to have served from 67 to 99 on the Wayne Circuit Court. But Geraldine, you're a good old friend, and for 32 years of service, you deserve to be first. Please come forward and give your remarks.
Chief Justice Corrigan, Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Riley, Justice Kelly, Justice Markman, Justice Taylor, Justice Weaver, and Justice Young, Patricia, Terry, Jeff, Jason, Kurt, and David, and to this whole audience of friends, some of whom, some I've served with, and some who have just been plain friends over a long period of time. I'm really very proud to have been asked to participate today. I think the principal reason is, as some of you happen to know, I'm speaking about a friend and a solid friendship which has endured for a period of almost 40 years. Can you believe it? I can hardly believe it myself. I want to pay tribute also to Dean Mahoney and to the Wayne State University Law School at a time when, I'm not sure, Patty and I have talked about it many times, but we don't recall as students at Wayne, or even thinking about going to Wayne, that we thought about the fact that we were female. We just applied and expected Wayne to accept us. And Wayne, in my own view, always seemed to accept and encourage everyone. So I feel very proud to be here in the very august setting in which we are having this ceremony, because of course Patty and I went to law school on Cass Avenue, and most of our classes were in, I believe it was the horse stable. Carriage, I guess politely you would have said the carriage house. I practiced law. I graduated in 1951 and practiced law with my dad for an extended period of time, and my brother. And I decided finally, as a mother, that I had to get a job and be more orderly in my life with my children. So, having been active somewhat politically, I applied for a position in the U.S. Attorney's Office. And Mr. Gubo, with his graciousness and with some support from political persons, I was appointed in 1963 to the position of Assistant United States Attorney. Well, I had worked for all those years with men, with my dad and with Wade McCree and Hobart Taylor and some other folks that you probably know. And it's very interesting when I reflect upon it, I never talked about my home. I never talked about my children, because you just didn't take up subjects like that in the company of men. Well, when I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, it was scant different. I see Paul Borman here. He was one of the men in the office, and I was the only female there. So we didn't talk about those things there either. And one day, I went downstairs to file something or other with Judge Thaddeus Makrovich, and who appeared but this cute girl? And I could tell that she was a lawyer, and the way I could tell was she had on a brand new sort of rose-colored suit with a perfect white shirt, and her hair was perfectly coiffed. Well, I knew that was the way all females started out when they practiced law. So we sort of breathlessly talked to each other, and I got kind of a thumbnail sketch of her life, when she had graduated, how she came to clerk with Judge Makrovich, whose clerk was involved in an automobile accident. Well, soon after that, we began to hear rumors in the U.S. Attorney's Office that Patty, who was working for Judge Makrovich, had babysat for Larry Gubo's children. And the rumor that came after that was that she was such a favorite of Estelle and Larry Gubo's that she was going to be an assistant U.S. attorney. Well, that seemed very hot to me. When Patty came upstairs, it was almost as if I had found a long-lost friend. Now, do you think that we started talking about the law? No. We started talking about cooking, children, Ernie, and Miss Odom. And you probably want to know who Ernie and Miss Odom are. Those were the ladies upon whom we depended to take care of our children so that we could come to work every day. And they took up a substantial amount of our conversation. They always came, but there was always the possibility that they might not come. Well, Patty and I served together, and I tell you, she was, and I think it was really very meaningful to both of us. I don't think that we ever understood how much we missed being in the company of women friends. The guys were fine, but you always need a girlfriend. So I stayed in the U.S. Attorney's Office until 1964 when I left and went to the Office of the Corporation Counsel for the City of Detroit. And while I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, we always prized Paul Comovas, and I'm sure some of you know Judge Comovas. If you wanted an answer to a question, all you had to do was call him on the telephone. He could give you the case, the page, the date, everything. Well, Patty came along and she duplicated that feat. So our friendship continued into when I went to the Corporation Counsel office, and Patty and I used to go up on Woodward Avenue, and we'd meet for lunch and come back, and she would keep on going across Woodward at State Street. I'd keep on going down to the City-County building. And in 1966, I rather decided that I was going to run for the Recorder's Court. Well, Patty was one of the main persons on my committee. And interestingly enough, we didn't even discuss the fact that I was running for Recorder's Court, a court that handled major criminal cases, all felonies, and that I was a female. Never occurred to either one of us. So Patty helped me a whole lot, and I was elected to Recorder's Court. Well, after that time, Patty and I kept on talking. She was still in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and one day upon, I started to say the midnight clear, but it was not midnight, it was midday, came a handsome young assistant prosecutor, and he took charge of everything. And everybody in the courtroom knew that he was in charge. And I tell you, he was brilliant, and his mind was so stimulating that everyone sat up and took notice. And when I was talking to Patty, I said, Patty, I think I found your match. So Patty wasn't too much interested in what I was talking about, but I kept saying it to her, and I kept saying it to her. And one day, about 69, she told me that she was contemplating coming to the prosecuting attorney's office, and I encouraged her mightily, and I kept saying to her, Patty, this person has this mind. You're really going to enjoy talking and arguing with this person. Patty still didn't pay too much attention to me, but at least I got his name in there. It was Terrence Boyle, as I'm sure all of you have guessed. Well, Patty came over to Recorder's Court, and I don't think she was as impressed as I was. But I think after much talking, Patty became as impressed, and probably even more, than I was. And I guess, as they say, the rest is history. Patty was outstanding as an assistant prosecuting attorney for Wayne County. Her admirers were legion when she was appointed by Governor Blanchard to the bench at the Recorder's Court. She was always at the top of the list in terms of the lawyer's evaluation of her. And I think it's very important to say, and I say this from a personal standpoint and from a professional standpoint, Justice Boyle's courageous ideas and lofty ideals have changed the law in the state of Michigan. Her success as a whole human being, committed to her family and the community which she has so ably served, stands as an inspiration to all of us. In closing, I would borrow from Abraham Lincoln and say of Justice Patricia Boyle, I like to see a woman proud of the place in which she lives. I like to see a woman live so that her place is proud of her.
Thank you, Judge Ford. It's now my pleasure to call on Timothy Boffman to say a few words on behalf of Justice Boyle. Tim?
Police and Court, Tim Boffman for the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office. I don't generally direct my remarks away from the court, it just sometimes seems that way. It's truly an honor and privilege for me to be here and have the chance to say a few words because Justice Boyle was my first supervisor when I began in the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office over 26 years ago now. And now I occupy and sit at her desk. And I mean that literally. The Wayne County is not too keen on capital expenditure, so it's really, it's the same desk. And Chief Justice Corrigan and I began together working for Justice Boyle in the Appellate Department of the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office. And I like to tell people that this demonstrates that with some hard work and dedication, at least one of us made something of a success of themselves in the profession and the other became a judge. So there are many people here that I've worked with and appeared before whose professional and personal lives have led to close associations with Justice Boyle. I see Judge Ryan, Judge Borman, Judge Geraldine Ford, and many others. And of course, the current court, many if not all of its members. And I would say it's not always nice to appear before the current court, and especially so today. This is because the last time I appeared before the court, it turned out I was, how shall I put it, under-persuasive. And today, it's good to be here when it's not possible for me to lose because there can be no argument about the merits of the remarks I'm going to make today. I'm going to spend just a few moments talking about sort of the Wayne County prosecutor years of Justice Boyle, at least as I know them from when I came in. I started at the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, and when I started, I knew no one and no one knew me. In fact, I didn't know any lawyers. I'd had no clerkships, no internships. It was my first job other than working in factories in the summers, so I had no idea what to expect. And I can tell you, and there are people here I know who can vouch for this, that the sense of excitement and mission was palpable in the office. You could almost touch it. It prevailed in everything that was done, and the mission that we were about was to seek the truth in all things. And I think the three people who are responsible for this excitement and sense of mission, there were three people who were responsible for this, and two of them are here today. The first was William Elka Halen. He had the vision to create a prosecutor's office for the 20th century, and as a part of that vision, to hire brilliant and energetic department heads and engage them in helping him construct the office and the hiring of the attorneys, the setting of policy and the like. He essentially turned them loose, gave them their head to do that which they were good at. As a illustrative aside, to show the kind of atmosphere that was there, within 6 months of my arrival in the office, I found myself on a plane for the first time in my life, flying to Washington, D.C. with a group of prosecuting attorneys from our office to watch Tom Khalil argue Michigan versus Mosley in the United States Supreme Court, the first argument ever from our office in that court. That it was Tom that was arguing rather than Prosecutor Cahalan or Terry or Pat says a lot about those individuals and what they believed in, and is a tradition that has carried forward in our office to this day. The other two, in addition to Prosecutor Cahalan, of what might by analogy to the big four of the court be referred to as the big three in the history of Wayne County's prosecutor's office, were of course Pat Boyle and Terry Boyle. Just imagine, if you will, a prosecutor's office with Patricia Boyle, the head of appeals, Terry Boyle, the head of trials, and attorneys such as Maura Corrigan, Tim Kenny, Tom Khalil, Andrea Solak, and many others at the beginning of their legal careers. I didn't have to imagine it. I lived through it, and it was a very exciting time. But we're here to honor Justice Boyle. It is necessary for me, when I talk about the Wayne County years, to also talk about Terry Boyle. For the accomplishments of our office and its development as a great prosecutor's office were the result of both of their efforts generally working as a team. And I wanted to take just a few moments to mention several of these accomplishments. The development of the office through recruitment of the staff, I think, is one of the outstanding things that occurred with Pat and Terry. They worked to create the best prosecutor's office possible, in part through staffing, by recruiting outstanding people, piquing interest with internships and clerkships, and ensuring that hiring was based on merit and not patronage, by an examination and interview process. I still remember my oral examination, which asked rigorous questions on criminal law, criminal procedure, evidence, and I remember that Pat and Terry were on the panel. I even remember some of the questions. I have endeavored to forget some of my answers, or at least to improve upon them in the recollection. Also, once an outstanding staff is put on board, it was critical that that staff receive ongoing legal education. As we all know, the law changes almost minute by minute. So Pat and Terry ensured that there were regular memoranda circulated on important decisions, that in-house programs were conducted, that staff meetings were held, and that the office participated with the Prosecuting Attorneys Association of Michigan in the development of outstanding programs and the participation in those programs, both by having staff attend and have members of the staff, including Pat and Terry, as faculty at those programs. Pat and Terry also ensured that the prosecution was treated as a separate but equal partner in the criminal justice system, and that cases were litigated on the merits. And in part, I refer here to the James Del Rio episode and the courageous part Pat and Terry played in resisting Judge Del Rio's attempts to bully and intimidate them and Prosecutor Cahalan. I won't here repeat some of the language employed by Judge Del Rio in those attempts, but those of you who are unfamiliar with that matter might wish to take a look at the Michigan Supreme Court opinion on his removal. You will find what went on hard to believe. I mean, people will say that this really happened. Well, it really happened, and Pat and Terry, and I believe probably some other people who were in the audience, acted with courage and resolve in ending that kind of sorry episode in our history. Of critical importance to our office was the role Pat and Terry played in developing the law, as Judge Ford indicated, both through litigation and through legislation. I mentioned our first Supreme Court argument, Michigan versus Mosley. Preparation for that argument was intense. There were 4 or 5 mock arguments at which giants of the field like Professor Grano were recruited to play roles as justices and to grill Tom Khalil. And the result of that was no question asked by a very active United States Supreme Court was unanticipated in the preparation, save for one question to Tom that I think came from Justice White, which was, why are you here and not the Attorney General? Which Tom handled quite well. This tradition has continued, as I indicated before, up through today, and in fact we have in-house mock arguments in all of our Michigan Supreme Court arguments as well. We allow the arguer to get to name the justices when they answer questions, which can be a lot of fun. One of Pat and Terry's accomplishments, which set a tone for the entire nation, was their lead role in the creation of Michigan's criminal sexual conduct laws, including the rape shield provisions, which became a model for the country, emulated, I believe, in some form by every state in the country. Justice Boyle testified before legislative committees to ensure the passage of this legislation, and Terry was called by legislatures in other states to testify when they considered similar legislation and did so with great effect. I've mentioned earlier the tone, the sense of mission of our office, and Pat and Terry fostered that spirit, were critical to its existence. They fostered a spirit of camaraderie among the staff. Their doors were always open. You could come in and bounce ideas and problems off them, which was a great advantage for us. I remember one of the first appeals I did, I thought we were dead in the water. There was no way we could prevail. And I talked to Pat, and she pointed me in the right direction. We ended up winning in a published opinion, something I wouldn't have thought of on my own. It was a wonderful advantage for us to have these assets. I could go on for a very long time and would love to do so, but there are others who wish to speak about facets of Justice Boyle's career. So let me close just with this. I think it was Charles de Gaulle who said that the graveyards are filled with indispensable people. And by that he meant, of course, that no one is indispensable. And this is, of course, true. The Wayne County Prosecutor's Office goes on, the court goes on. But it is also sometimes said that no one is irreplaceable. And this is demonstrably untrue. It's a fact of life that people do come and go. But with a very few people, even institutions as well as individuals whose lives they touch, are the better for them having been there and the poorer for them having left. And the reason this is so is unique to the force of their intellect, their personality, and their integrity. And while it is worthy of emulation, it is not subject to replication. Pat and Terry were such people within the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, and they remain friends and mentors for many of us and will always do so. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
The name of our next speaker appears in 2 places on your program. He is a director of the Michigan Supreme Court Historical Society, and he is also a judge of the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, the Honorable James L. Ryan, who served from 83 to 86 with Justice Boyle, so he will have some things to tell you about Boyle on the court.
Madam Chief Justice, Associate Justices, please excuse my bag. and most of all, Justice Boyle. In the Christian world, today is a holy day. It's All Saints' Day. Consequently, it's a singularly fitting day for the canonization of my pal, Patty Boyle. My assignment in today's program, as I've been told, is to provide a glimpse into that narrow window in time when Justice Boyle joined the Supreme Court, and for the period shortly thereafter when she and I served together. It's important to remember, I think, that what is done and said here today is preserved verbatim in the reports of the Michigan Supreme Court, in the published reports of the court, providing, I think, an important source of information about the court's history, the justices who serve there. And so what I have to say, although from the heart, is as much for posterity as it is for the edification of this very large throng of friends of Patty's and Terry's who are here to honor her. It wasn't easy to get Patty Boyle to accept then Governor James Blanchard's appointment to this court. There's a myth abroad, you know, that in most instances when one is summoned by a governor to service on the Michigan Supreme Court, he or she rather reluctantly lays aside an often profitable private professional career or a very satisfying judicial service elsewhere, and then out of a sense of profound public duty answers yes to the governor's summons. That truth in the vast majority of instances isn't. The vast majority of instances with which I'm familiar personally is that the governor is besieged with petitions from a wide array of aspirants to appointment, which petitioners in greater or lesser measure eloquently sing the praises of their own virtues and attempt assiduously to bear upon the governor all the psychological and political and professional pressure that circumstances will bear. If I overstate the case, I have in mind, of course, my own experience. This was decidedly not the situation in Governor Blanchard's offer to persuade Patty Boyle to accept his appointment to the Supreme Court. She was an absolute all-star, an all-star candidate, a top-level graduate of this great institution, editor of her law review, senior appellate attorney in the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, as Tim has described, had a record of distinguished service as a Recorder's Court trial judge, and was then completing about 5 years of service as a United States District Judge in the Eastern District of Michigan. Now, the newly elected Governor Blanchard was anxious, I think, to make an impressive and distinguished first appointment to the court. He did not have to do much casting about to recognize that one of the most distinguished, experienced, capable lawyer judges in the state of Michigan, who not unimportantly was a woman, this was 1983, remember, was federal Judge Patricia Boyle. Unfortunately, she was serving in a lifetime appointment in the federal court. Why, the political prognosticators ruminated, would she give up the prestige and security of a lifetime appointment as a federal judge for an appointment to the state Supreme Court that would require, within 3 years in her case, the burden of raising about $250,000 for successive statewide political campaigns, further fundraising for her re-election and retention on the court 8 years later, and which, if she were successful, would only culminate in her forced departure from the court at the age 70 on a pension that is dwarfed by what federal judges are paid when they retire. Well, the formidability of the challenge facing Governor Blanchard, who is with us today, to persuade Patty to accept his appointment was not lost on him. He did not get to be governor because he was shy or reticent. Not only did he approach Justice Boyle directly and ask her to accept his appointment, you didn't know I knew this, did you? Recognizing that she had a great deal to give up, but he also enlisted the participation of a fairly substantial number of other persons to work on Patty. Now, to give you an indication of just how devoted Governor Blanchard was to this mission, he even asked me, of all people, a sitting justice previously appointed by Governor Milliken, I, who certainly never sang out of Governor Blanchard's political hymn book, if I would be willing to attempt to persuade her to accept his appointment. If you may not remember this, it occurred on St. Patrick's Day. Well, after giving the matter careful consideration, I decided to try to help. I had two reasons. One of them is I knew what an extraordinarily well-qualified lawyer and experienced judge then Judge Boyle was, how gifted she was intellectually and temperamentally, highly respected trial judge. I did encourage her to accept the appointment because I knew how good she was and how good I thought she would be for the court. Now, to this day, Patty claims that I used a bit of high-flown hyperbole in my argument to get her to give up a federal lifetime court appointment to come to our court. But frankly, the most I can recall saying to her is that you'll love the work, you'll come to love your colleagues, you'll come to love running around Michigan's 83 counties, covering 50,000 miles every couple of years, trying to raise more money than you've ever seen in your life, eating 1,000 rubber chickens, and puzzling over what it is you can tell the Rotary Club in Kalamazoo during your candidacy and not offend the canons of judicial conduct. But Patty accepted Governor Blanchard's appointment, and frankly, I do not delude myself that my pitch had much to do with it. But unlike the large majority of judicial appointments and judicial aspirants I described earlier, Patty Boyle's resignation from her lifetime appointment in the federal court, with the privilege of serving in the Michigan Supreme Court, with all the political shortcomings that would entail, was as close as I can recall to a person accepting a governor's plea to accept his appointment largely, if not entirely, out of a sense of duty. As it turned out, the people of Michigan and Michigan's jurisprudence were the winners. In my view, it's irrefutably true that a 7-member appellate court, such as our Supreme Court, is much like a chemical composition. If one element is removed and another substituted, the whole is altered. What previously existed ends, and a new entity comes into existence. And similarly, I think, with the court is, after all, a collegial body, and when one member of the court departs and a new member arrives, the collegial chemistry of the court is altered far more radically than one might think, and a new judicial entity comes into existence. The significance of that, of course, is that collegial decision-making is an art. It is not taught to lawyers and judges in law school. It is not learned in law firms. It is not the subject of study. Some have it or develop it in greater measure than do others. Just when 7 justices start to get it down, as they say, a change in the court personnel of just one justice requires that the training and the discipline and the development of the art must begin anew. Just before Patty's arrival to our court in April of 1983, the court was, in my judgment, in a regrettable state of tension and turmoil. There had been a wholesale change of justices in a very short time, not just one. In addition, in response to its obligation to rule on a lawsuit presented to it, the court, rather bitterly divided, as I recall, resolved by majority vote to oust, that's the word in the order, one of its members. Here's the snapshot. Justice Blair Moody died tragically and suddenly the day after Thanksgiving in November of 1982. Within 2 weeks, Governor Milliken, who was finishing out his last days in office, appointed the distinguished Judge Dorothy Comstock Riley of the Court of Appeals to what had been the Moody seat, change number 1. Within 2 weeks of that, Justice Mary Coleman startled us at conference by telling us that she was retiring. Within 3 days, the departing Governor Milliken announced the appointment of the late Justice Jim Brickley to serve in what had been Justice Coleman's seat. Less than 10 days after that, on January the 1st, Justice John Fitzgerald left the court, having chosen not to run for re-election the previous November, and he was that day replaced by Justice Michael Kavanaugh, who had been elected to Fitz's seat the previous November. Now, depending on how you count it, That is either 3 or 6 abrupt changes to the court. 3 justices departing and a new 3 justices arriving. And if all that were not enough to upset the continuity and the delicate art of collegial decision-making in our court, and to nullify whatever practice collegiality we had developed in the previous year, what occurred during the next 40 days nearly devastated what collegiality was left. A lawsuit had been filed challenging the incumbency of newly appointed Justice Riley. The argument for the plaintiffs was that Justice Riley's appointment in December was good for just 3 weeks, until January the 1st. Not, as Governor Milliken had thought, until the next general election. The position taken by Justice Riley and many on her behalf was that her appointment survived the change in gubernatorial administrations and had not terminated. In early February, now just less than 60 days since the first of the departures occurred, with what I remember as a rather tumultuous and divisive and in some respects difficult dialogue and decision, a majority of the justices, speaking for the court, declared Justice Riley's service was at an end and that she must vacate her seat. Now, this is history. It was in that tumultuous situation that Justice Boyle arrived in the court in April of 1983 to succeed Judge Riley. It was a time of tension and turmoil. There were strained relationships among the justices and even some hard feelings. Justice Boyle would have been justified in thinking that she was walking into a very difficult situation. The fact is that from the first day of her service in the court, Patty Boyle was an immensely calming and ameliorating influence. She came to us as a widely experienced lawyer with a profound understanding of the judicial process. She had a history of impressive scholarship, enormous personal industry, and a personal style in the decisional process that was admirable and, I must say, in due course, contagious. It became immediately apparent that she brought no agenda, no political commitments, no unpaid debts, no obligation to any individual institution or ideology. It was obvious to me from the very beginning that she had no determination to push the court to the ideological left or to the center or any place else. Her commitment with respect to the cases was just to get it right. She was from day one a lawyer's judge. Her work was always painstaking and thoughtful and always thoroughly researched and temperately argued in conference and temperately written. Her opinions over the course of her 16 years enthralled and disappointed conservatives and liberals alike. And what greater tribute can there be to a justice of the Supreme Court that that is so? Patty and I did not always agree. Indeed, we fairly often disagreed. It was often troubling to me that she was a greater master of the art of gentle, collegial decision-making than I was. And when at conference the decision or the discussion became spirited and my own Irish genes began to generate more heat than light, I would benefit immediately from the calm and calming tone of Patty Boyle's voice, her measured and lucid style of argument, and I must confess, too often, the force of her logic. These, of course, being among the most important gifts in the art of collegial decision-making. Well, I close now recalling a small, but to me, significant indicator of the gentleness and graciousness of this powerful lawyer and judge. An incident which is, I think, a window, albeit small, into her extraordinarily admirable character. Before leaving the court, it had fallen to me to write an opinion on a relatively complex and difficult issue of evidence. In the years following the release of that opinion, a number of panels of the Michigan Court of Appeals, certainly not all, had applied the rule announced in my opinion, I thought, far too broadly, and several panels claimed for it implications that, in my view, were unwarranted and unjustified. The result, I think, was a growing body of law from our intermediate appellate court and from some trial courts that was a bit off the mark. In due course, after I had left the court, Justice Patty Boyle wrote an opinion for the court which undertook to correct the misreading of my old opinion by some of the lower court panels, but she went much farther than that. She overruled with most exquisite and eloquent language some of the stuff I thought was really good. Well, I was gone from the court by then and engaged in a new phase of my professional life, but I love this court. I think you know that, and I read its opinions regularly. And when I read the Justice Boyle opinion overruling my contribution of a few years earlier, the heat started rising until I got to footnote 29. In footnote 29, in an utterly unnecessary but uncommonly gracious gesture, Patty Boyle mentioned me by name and made a brief but very generous observation about the worth of what I had written when I had written it. Justice Boyle enhanced the strength and the stature of the Supreme Court by coming, and of necessity, diminished it a bit by her going. Good luck, Patty. Godspeed.
Thank you, Judge Ryan. Jim served for 3 years on the court with Patty, 83 to 86, and I now have the pleasure of calling on the Honorable Robert P. Griffin, who served for 9 years, to give you the rest of the story.
Chief Justice Corrigan, justices of the court, ladies and gentlemen. It will always be an honor, a high honor, to participate in any proceeding before this great court. And it's especially when you're from the other side of the bench. Mm-hmm. I am also very glad that we hold this meeting in the Wayne State University Law School, where I can speak about one of its most distinguished graduates who grew in stature to become a giant in the legal profession and the judiciary. I look at the audience and I realize that I'm not going to reveal any great new facts for as many of you, but as Jim Ryan said, you know, we are speaking for the record and we're speaking for the reports. Somehow it seems fitting that I should say a few words at this ceremony because, after all, I bear a very rather unusual distinction. I once ran against Patty for a seat on the Michigan Supreme Court and lost. Now, Menon Williams and Frank Kelly, who was here incidentally today, and Carl Levin were very formidable opponents, to say the least. But then there was Patty Boyle. Now, at first blush in 1984, it seemed like the Republican State Convention was bestowing some kind of a great honor on me when they nominated me to be one of the candidates to contest for 2 seats that were at stake on the Michigan Supreme Court. But the bad fortune came to me when I managed to draw the slot that placed me in opposition to Patty Boyle on the ballot. Well, in many respects, it was hardly a typical campaign. Talk about civility. I couldn't find a thing bad to say about her. And she never uttered an unkind word about me. But I did begin to sense in the campaign a little trouble when the Republican prosecuting attorney in my home county of Grand Traverse publicly announced in the local newspaper his support for my opponent. Well, you might imagine I made a beeline to that prosecutor's office and I did some very vigorous pounding on his desk. But the only response that I received was, Well, Bob, I'm sure you could become a good judge someday, but you really have no business running against Patty Boyle. Well, I learned. And of course, I learned after serving with Patty Boyle on the court that he was absolutely right. And with the advantage of long hindsight, I can say that I'm really glad, and it's the only election I'm glad to say that I lost. As it turned out, the result was good for the court, and it was good for me. My opportunity did come 2 years down the road when, along with Dennis Archer, I was elected to an 8-year term on the court. And this is the span of time during which I was privileged to work closely with Patty and 5 colleagues on a court that I would describe as very collegial. Oh, there were plenty of differences and arguments in those conferences following the oral arguments when we had to decide the cases. The most interesting and longest debates, however, were waged not between Republicans and Democrats, but between Patty and her favorite sparring partner, Chuck Levin. A number of the cases we tackled attracted the spotlight of wide public attention. And to mention just a few, there was that struggle between would-be parents in Michigan and would-be parents in Iowa over the custody of baby Jessica. And we had lots of legal problems with Dr. Jack Kevorkian and his assisted suicide practice. And when the legislature failed to do its job of redistricting following the 1990 census, the responsibility fell on our shoulders. And we worked hard and long with a minimum of partisanship until we fashioned a plan that won the unanimous vote of our court. Understandingly, I suggest, Patty's colleagues constantly looked to her for guidance and wisdom when we confronted the thorniest and the most challenging issues. We knew Patty not only as a scholar with a wealth of learning and experience, but also as a dedicated, tireless student of every case and every issue. Steeped in love of the court and equipped with a keen and fertile mind, Patty wrote opinions that earned universal respect and acclaim, not only of her colleagues on the court, but also of the bar at large. By reason of the example she's left as a jurist, and through the wisdom and logic of her opinions in the Michigan reports, Patty Boyle continues in retirement to be a great teacher of the law she loves. As in the case of the Big Four, whose contribution is legendary, the portrait of Patricia Boyle presented to the court today should serve as a constant reminder that she has been a moving force in the rich history of Michigan's jurisprudence. In closing, I've chosen to repeat a single regret that lingers in the wake of Patty Boyle's remarkable career. It's a nation's great loss that she was never elevated to the United States Supreme Court. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. What would a judge or a justice be without clerks, law clerks? So it's only fitting that we should call on a former law clerk for Justice Boyle to give her view of the judge. Mary Masson Ross. Mary?
May it please the court, Chief Justice Corrigan, I apologize for speaking facing the other direction. It is a pleasure to be here today to honor Justice Boyle and to share with you a few thoughts about her contributions to the Michigan Supreme Court. Working with her was enormously rewarding. We, her law clerks, learned from her tremendous intelligence, her prodigious scholarship, her willingness to follow the rule of law. We experienced her personal warmth and enjoyed her impish sense of humor. Some of these attributes are readily apparent in her written opinions. Others can be seen more completely in her conduct off the bench. Without telling too many secrets, let me share with you some thoughts and memories about Justice Boyle from my vantage point as one of her former law clerks. The lawyers here today are undoubtedly familiar with the opinions that she authored, but I thought you might find it interesting to hear a little about the process of her decision-making in writing. Of course, it began with oral arguments. The clerk who had prepared for the day's cases drove her to Lansing. Justice Boyle sat in the back seat, which was piled high with briefs, copies of the most significant cases, law reviews, the appendix, and other materials that she wanted to reread before oral argument. She did not want a radio or any chatter to distract from her final preparation. Occasionally, she asked questions about the parties' positions and the implications flowing from some argument. But for the most part, the car was silent as she studied, the papers scattered all about the back seat. She did look up, I am told, one wintry day when Justice Mallet was standing next to his car, which was buried off to the side of a road in a snowbank after his clerk had driven into a ditch. At oral argument, Justice Boyle's questions focused on the nuances of the argument. She sought to clarify the advocate's position, to understand the rule the advocate urged the court to adopt, and the rationale the court should employ to reach the rule. She was courteous and low-key in her demeanor. Occasionally, she would throw an easy question to an advocate who had become flustered by a series of difficult questions, so the advocate could regroup and return to his or her argument. After oral argument in the court's conference, she liked to discuss the advocate's presentation, the outcome at conference, and the opinion writing to follow. Back in her chambers, her office staff would give the law clerks notes she had scrawled on the pages of the briefs during oral argument. Big block letters going across the page and down the side, sometimes one letter to a line. They twisted and turned around the paper. Unscrambling them was difficult. Her longtime staff members, Marjorie Baird and May Doss, could usually decipher her directions for further research into the record or the law. For her law clerks, these questions meant hours of research, often far beyond the lines of authorities discussed in the parties' briefs. Justice Boyle is and was known for her tremendous scholarship. When summoned to her office, we clerks often found her surrounded again by copies of cases, briefs, law reviews, and law books, completely covering her desk and spilling onto the floor in piles all over the place. She loved the intellectual rigor required to defend her views and enjoyed the interchange with her colleagues enormously. Drafts of opinions would fly back and forth between the justices' chambers as each side tried to strengthen the articulation of their view of the case and perhaps persuade enough justices to win a majority. Justice Boyle wanted her writing to hold up against the challenge that could be anticipated in any dissenting opinion, and she revised her work until she felt confident that it was as strong as it could be. She was competitive enough to particularly enjoy those occasions when she could turn a dissent into a majority. Always, she retained her humor and humility in the process. Once, when we were revising a draft majority opinion to respond to a dissent authored by Justice Levin, she looked at a statue of a wizard sitting on her desk, holding a crystal ball, and she said, "This reminds me of Justice Levin searching for legislative history." Lest you should think she did not recognize and appreciate Justice Levin's contribution to the court, let me share with you a remark she made recently when accepting an award from the appellate practice section of the State Bar. She said then that Justice Levin had taught her that language is always contextual. Justice Boyle agreed with those who believed that the judiciary must defer to the determinate legislative text, but she acknowledged that such a text could be, and often was, ambiguous. In one decision, she said, mindful of Cardozo's admonition that we are not knights errant, roaming at will in pursuit of our own ideal of truth and goodness, we refrain from attempting to redefine the statutory obligations at issue. At the same time, she explained that the court had done everything possible from a judicial perspective to define a path by which employers and employees could in good faith navigate two complex and different sets of statutory obligations. In another decision, after honestly acknowledging a gap in the text, she observed that language, the probable purpose, the historical context in which the legislation was enacted, and current policy all could be considered when analyzing the proper outcome. Justice Boyle spoke candidly in her opinions about countervailing concerns, recognizing the force of the opposing arguments. Her candor came from respect for those who disagreed with her and from her belief that the decision should lay bare the reasoning that led her to a particular result. She saw this as an important tool for bench and bar alike. She also saw it as a critical restraint upon the judiciary. If the decision would not right, she took this as a warning that perhaps the result was wrong and should be reconsidered. Occasionally, she would write the decision both ways to test the reasoning and be certain that she was reaching the correct result. She recognized the importance that the process played in honing decisions, her own and those of the rest of the bench. Socrates said that a judge should hear courteously, consider seriously, decide impartially. That sums up Justice Boyle's attributes as a Supreme Court justice. She once said that while we may not discover eternal truth, it is possible to touch its form from time to fleeting time. She spoke about the need not to shirk from the difficult labor of close analysis and to produce a result that, when the day is done, makes so much sense that we have the courage of conviction to announce it on the courthouse steps. Her work on the court was an effort to abide by this faith. Justice Boyle recognized the difficulties of the search for truth and the possibility of error. But in each and every decision that she issued, she sought to come as close as humanly possible to that truth. We, her law clerks, were privileged to help in the process. Thank you.
Judge Ryan gave us chapter and verse about Patty's coming on the Supreme Court. It seems to me only appropriate that you acknowledge and introduce the appointing authority, Governor Blanchard. And his lawyer, Frank Kelly. I got to make one correction for the record, and it's an important correction, I believe, because Patty was appointed by a Democratic governor, but Judge Ford, she was also appointed by a Republican governor, because it was Governor Milliken in 1967 who appointed her to the Detroit Recorder's Court. So I would introduce that as a bit of unusual trivia. Here's a person appointed to a nonpartisan office by two different governors of different parties. Okay, you're asking, when are we going to see the picture? When I looked at the next thing on the program, Terry Boyle, it reminded me how fond I had grown of saying, behind every good woman there's a good man. And I haven't said that for a while, but I can say it again today. And so let me now, without further delay, present to you the Honorable Terrence Boyle, who's going to do the thing about the picture with the family and show you what you've been waiting to see. Terry?
Madam Chief Justice, associate members of the court, may it please the court. First of all, let me allay your fears that water is not for me. It's here for Pat. My role today is to attempt to give insight into the personal side of Patricia Jean Earhart Pernick Boyle. Actually, Jim, driving down here, I said to Pat in the car, do you realize it's All Saints Day? And she said, no, what's All Saints Day? And so I explained to her what it was. She said, well, why do you bring it up? And I said, well, Ryan's on the program. I bet he's going to mention it. Now, it's a true story. It just happened on the way down here. And she said, well, why? Well, I didn't tell her the reason because I didn't want her to understand in advance what I was going to say. The canonization is not complete yet. So today I'm going to play the role of the devil's advocate. Ooh. In the mid-1970s, I was talking to Joyce Braithwaite, and I gave a compliment to Governor Milliken. Joyce said to me very quickly, what you see is what you get. Of course, she was right. The focus was on the absence of artifice, the absence of deceit, the absence of ill will, the presence of fundamental human decency. I mention this because I know this all applies to Pat as well. But the question is, does it do it? In other words, does it capture her? And the answer is unequivocally no. It's true of Pat, but it presents an incomplete picture. It fails to reveal mostly her complexity. After 31 and a half years of marriage, I still discover new things about her, literally. I'd like to say daily, but that would be a lie. But monthly, new things about her. And that's because she continues to grow. Actually, Crosby sang a song. Now, I'm not going to try to sing because my friends here and relatives understand I have a terrible voice. But there was a song where he was saying, accentuate the positive. Now, somebody here ought to be old enough to remember that, right? Accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, latch on to the affirmative, and don't mess with Mr. in between, okay? Now, does that do it? While it is generally true about Pat, again, it's incomplete. This is a woman who has had, in my view, a transformational effect on Michigan criminal jurisprudence, not to speak of jurisprudence in general. Not only as a judge, but as a prosecutor. Those things were mentioned mostly by Tim Bothman in terms of the contributions that were made. And it also, you also have to understand, to be able to accomplish that requires traits like tenacity and competitiveness. And believe me, she has those inside her. It also overlooks what I know to be a thoroughly wicked sense of humor. Let me give you two examples of that. Rick Coretti was a young lawyer at Dickinson Wright. On his first appearance before Pat, while Pat was on the federal bench, he came into court with a gaggle of lawyers and clients. I had known Rick when he was a Detroit police officer, and Pat had met Rick before on the softball field, where she had seen him exclusively in cutoffs and T-shirts. She looked from the bench in federal court, saw Rick in his blue pinstripe suit, and exclaimed immediately, "How nice to see you, Mr. Coretti. At first, I didn't recognize you with your clothes on." Now, you might think she made a mistake. She didn't. She didn't, and she left Rick to explain, especially to opposing lawyers, what that remark meant. There was a case of a lawyer who was earnestly arguing before the Michigan Supreme Court when she was on that bench. In that case, it was a case of repressed memory, and a trial judge had dismissed the case on the grounds of a statute of limitations. And so the lawyer was trying to convince the court, and he was saying that in conference, the case involved a claim that she had been physically abused as a child by her father, as well as by somebody else. And the lawyer was arguing before the Supreme Court and saying that in conference, honestly, new personalities would appear, of which his client was unaware. I mean, his client was unaware as these personalities came out. And the lawyer had this deep insight into this terrible case of multiple personalities. And Pat immediately asked from the bench, do you represent all of them? Now, I wasn't there. I know that Michael was. So maybe he can mention something about this later. I wasn't there. I don't know if there was any laughter in the courtroom, but there might have been somebody there who could have said, that's not funny. You know, seriously, that's not funny. But there is in Pat not only a sense of humor, but a need to laugh. And when she's having fun, the laughter is deep, it's throaty, and it's earthy. That's not negative enough. Let me go on here. We have to get some balance in this program and put all of this in perspective. Originally, as a matter of fact, in the preparation of these remarks, I thought I would demonstrate different traits by examples in her life rather than by simply characterizing the trait. I did so, but the speech was 2.5 hours long. I cut it down to 45 minutes, and then I gave up. I knew that other speakers would cover much of what I think is necessary to understand about Pat, so again, at least about the professional and public side of her. So I, again, kept my focus a little more narrow, and I thought I would continue to try to reveal or describe those things that I think are important that most people here wouldn't know. On the positive side, I tried to find a word for it. I can't do it. The best thing I can say is she's informed by a spirit which says, we're all in this together. Let's make this turn out right. Now, I don't know that there's a word for that, is there? But I tell you that that is the spirit that informs her family life, her friendships, as well as her professional life. I said that spirit was the positive side. Is there a negative side? Of course. Most human beings who are successful as a public office holder, especially elected public officials, maximize their strengths and minimize their weaknesses. Pat turns that on her head. She absolutely will not allow herself ever to even think about how good she really is. Some would say that's humility, a virtue. But if that trait holds you back, for whatever reason, from a position of greater public service, then that trait can be a vice. President Carter was elected in 1976. John O'Mara, who's here today, and I conspired together to find a way of getting Pat on the federal bench. For a period of time, she refused to even consider it because she deemed herself unworthy. Now, I know you think I'm overstating it. I'm not. Those are the words she used to me. I'm telling you, I prepared the application myself, got all of the opinions, did the research, prepared the whole thing, and only under the most intense coercion did she sign it on the mid-afternoon of the filing deadline. And now that's just a true point about what's in her personality. I think I will use some water. In Pat, there is a reservoir of personal courage so deep its bottom cannot be found. And Tim Boffman alluded to the Del Rio matter. Ask James Del Rio, who successfully intimidated many, many people, did his best with Pat and couldn't lay a glove on her. And it was. Tim invited you ought to get out the Supreme Court opinion and especially read the appendix because it quotes liberally from the testimony in that case and particularly from Judge Del Rio's remarks both to me and to Pat. Actually, in that case, I was the first witness called, and I believe I was on the stand 2.5 days in terms of just the counts that I had some knowledge of. Now, that's her personal courage. Yet I have seldom known anyone in life more risk-averse than Pat. You can say to yourself, Boyle, you've just contradicted yourself. That just can't be true. Both traits can't be true at the same time. And all I can tell you is they are. They exist simultaneously. We, all of us in this room, I think, are aware of how Pat came to the Supreme Court. Jim, thank you for doing it so much in detail, because it will save me some time going over all the facts which I would have repeated. I will, however, fill you in on the personal side of the story. On the personal side of the story, we did what we frequently do. We had a family meeting. We included in that family meeting Marjorie and Bill Baird, who were our closest friends at that time. We went out to a restaurant. We ate. We talked about the whole thing, went back to the house. We continued to talk. And I can still hear Jeff, our oldest son, saying, "Go for it, Mom." Okay? Well, I was the only person in this meeting that was steadfastly opposed to it. And Pat knew that. I think the governor knew that from our discussions with one another. I had a different dream for Pat. And my dream for Pat was to see her on the United States Supreme Court, and I regarded this as a backward step. Everybody had left the house. Pat and I talked about it and analyzed it for another couple of hours. And I finally said, 3 o'clock in the morning, it can't be talked about anymore. She came over, sat down on my lap, put her arms around my neck, and said, "I really want to do this. This is..." Her words verbatim were, "It is the opportunity to affect more lives in a better way." So I looked at her and I said, "You've made your decision." She said, "No. What'll happen is I'll give up my federal seat, Dorothy will run against me, she'll beat me, and I'll be out of a job." That's a true story. So I lifted her up off my lap, put her back in the chair, sat her down, and said, and actually before I did it, while I was doing it, I was laughing. And she really didn't appreciate the fact that I was laughing. She had tears in her eyes. And I sat her down and I said, in typical Boylean fashion, one, I always talk about one or first, second, third. So I said, 1, I remain opposed to this move, but it's your decision. 2, if you accept the appointment, no one will beat you if we both have to go 7 days a week, 24 hours a day for 1 full year. I would later come to regret that I had ever made such a statement. But to continue, I said, 3rd, if I'm wrong and you lose, you'll find a job, and I suspect you'll be laughing all the way to the bank. And 4, if I'm wrong about that, there's always welfare, Pat. But I want to take the time here to say a personal thank you to Justice Riley and to Wally Riley and to anybody else who influenced that decision. Believe me, she would have been horrible running with Dorothy running against her. It was horrible enough running with Bob running against her. It wasn't that it made it an easy election, but the fact is that the ouster captured the public attention in Michigan, and Justice Riley found a way of capturing the news media for about 2 solid years before that campaign. But I want to say thanks for the decision that was made. And Pat actually asked me that if, in my remarks, to mention that to both of you. Because it was in her sense, she was just deadly afraid of that eventuality. It was a thing in her mind that was holding her back. But as I said at the end, the personal courage takes over, and she decides to do something. Now, I'm just looking at my notes. I've been up here too long. You're all saying, I'm sure Pat is saying, shut up, Terry. I would need at least another hour to finish that, so I'm editing all of this out. I'm editing out the elections of '84 and '90. I'm editing out the election of President Clinton and what transpired after that when, well, I will say one thing about it, however. One thing. I was running in 1992. I retained my seat. I wasn't even concerned about my own election. I was concerned about the election of President Clinton. Pat went to bed that night at midnight. I stayed up all night. By the time she got up in the morning, I had 12 or 13 pages of block printed notes on how we would approach getting her on the United States Supreme Court. And of course, she became very angry because we had made a promise that from election night until the following Monday, there would be no discussion of politics or anything else. We were taking the time off. We were going to relax and enjoy it. I could go on talking about that, but it probably is advisable that I not do that because 1993 was not a good year in our marriage. It was a very, very, very tough time off decisions that Pat made. I'll skip further reference to all of that and simply mention two items that I think, I don't know if Pat will mention it, but I probably should leave it up to her to do it. I'm sure that there are some in the room, perhaps many in the room, that know that Pat was diagnosed with lung cancer 2 years ago. I say this now simply to tell you it's now 2 years later, and the medical experts are virtually certain that she has a clear. And by that, I mean to say they made a mistake in the diagnosis to begin with, okay? Even though they were 95% certain she had lung cancer, she in fact did not have lung cancer. Now she has something of unknown origin in the lungs, but it's not cancer. And they don't know what it is. I would add as well that that's the good news. The bad news is she's had 3 surgeries recently. In fact, just last week, had her gallbladder removed. And I now call her, I don't call her Pat anymore, I call her Slice and Dice. A second item. In happy retirement, and for me, I mean it seriously, Pat has kept her finger into the legal world. She's acting of counsel in 2 major cases where, I shouldn't say this, get some plaintiffs' lawyers mad, but where Jeffrey Feiger was a successful trial lawyer on the other side in 2 very large cases. And Pat is of counsel doing civil defense work now. And Jeff sent her a letter after her name was on a brief in the Chrysler case that went in and threatened to report her to the Tenure Commission for some of the contents that were in. Actually, the letter said, is Tom here yet, Keenbaum?
Yep.
Where is he? No?
He's upstairs on your left.
Oh, there he is. Feiger's letter said, I can understand, I'll leave blank, I can understand that blank Keenbaum saying something like this in a brief, but I can't imagine your having countenance such remarks, because part of the brief was to talk about misrepresentation and perhaps even fraud conducted by the attorney for the other side. But in any event, she's keeping her finger in it. I am really happy in retirement and have steadfastly refused any offers of employment of any kind, and I intend to continue to do that as long, I mean, I hope the stock market doesn't continue to go down, but barring that, I mean, I hope it starts to recover itself. If it does, I don't intend to ever return to the law. But in happy retirement, just recently, I reviewed the Republican redistricting of congressional seats. This is just in the newspaper. And I looked at it, and there was this really peculiar district that starts at Wayne County and goes northward all the way up and includes our house. Now, I know that the Republicans created what they thought was a very safe congressional district. I don't know the man, but is it Raskowski? I think that district was intended for him. But but I think he's now been drafted to run for the Senate and has ostensibly agreed. But there was this district, and I looked at it, and I went in and I said to Pat, look, you've been in the executive branch, you've been in the judicial branch, you've never been in the legislative branch. The Republicans created this really safe seat for themselves. Why don't you run and make it a Democratic seat? Now, I'll tell you something. I talked about her complexity, and by inference, ambiguity, things less than perfectly clear. In a New York second, complexity disappeared, it vanished, and that other personal quality reappeared. And I just quote her. I mean, it wasn't a half a second. She turned around to me with a resolute face and said, "You ain't whipping this old mare up another hill." I'm not making it up. That's a true story. And that is Patty Boyle. Now, with that, let me introduce our 4 grandchildren. Brian Pernick. Come on forward. Sarah Pernick. Nathan Pernick. And Riley Pernick. And if you'll do the honors by unveiling the portrait for the court. Thank you.
The portrait is by an artist named Carl Owens, who lives in Atlanta and whose work I first observed when he painted Judge Ford's portrait on the occasion of her retirement. I like it. I hoped that it would remind all of you who had argued before me of the times when you presented cases to me. I want it to look perhaps nicer than I was to your argument. First, I should thank the justices for their graciousness in agreeing to host this event here in Detroit at the law school from which I graduated. Judge Ford spoke of the importance of Wayne Law School to us, and it is certainly true that without Wayne's night school and without the financial assistance that the university gave me, I would never have become a lawyer. I am deeply grateful for my education and for the fact that being a lawyer, learning to think like a lawyer, is probably the single most transformative experience in my life. It gave me the first and greatest step toward what all of us hope for in life, the control of our own destiny and the development of a sense of who we are and what we are about. We could hardly have anticipated when the justices were asked if we could have the ceremony here in Detroit that the events of September 11th would cast their shadow over this gathering. And justices, your presence here today and the presence of each of you is our affirmative response to the President's challenge to go on with the business of our lives. And your presence here is an example of leadership that we are deeply grateful for. Justice Brennan was mentioned during the course of Wally's remarks, and it Justice Brennan, along with Justice Ryan, are two of the most formidable speakers who have ever graced our court. And Justice Brennan once said that the court, referring to the Michigan Supreme Court, is not a room or a building, it is people. Their story is our story. And of course, that is what this ceremony and all of the ceremonies that the Michigan Historical Society, which was Justice Riley's idea, and she and Wally have nurtured that idea into the wonderful force that it is for continuity of the court and its membership. And I need to begin also by thanking the Historical Society and Angela Bergman and all the members of the board for this wonderful gathering. Terry and I also extend our deepest thanks to Liz Hardy and Tom Kienbaum. It's been a theme of these remarks that lives intersect in the legal profession and in politics. And I performed the wedding for Liz Hardy and Tom Kienbaum. Liz was Judge Griffin's assistant, an intern in his office, I believe, when he was in the United States Senate. And I also performed the wedding of Maura Corrigan and Joseph Grano. Liz and Tom prodded us into this event when I was sick 2 years ago. And having heard the current state of my health, I can tell you that I'm extremely grateful to be present on the occasion. I want to thank the Attorney General and Governor Blanchard and Janet Blanchard for being with us today. And I am so grateful to so many members of the federal bench for joining me here. Avon and I were part of the same class going through the process of appointment by Senator Regal. Of course, Avon was older. And John Fikens was my dearest friend on the court. My dearest friend, the person to whom I went when Governor Blanchard made the offer to me to come to the Michigan Supreme Court. John, too, urged me not to leave. And there is one in this room who not only urged me not to leave, but wrote a note which I still treasure. I keep scrapbooks, and this is one of my favorite possessions. It is a note written by a distinguished practitioner who will remain unidentified, saying that he had heard the rumor that I was thinking of leaving the federal court and that he knew that I could never do anything so dumb. He underestimated the persuasiveness of Governor Blanchard and of Jim Ryan. You've heard from Mary Masseron Ross, and you've heard about Marjorie Baird and Mae Doss, the two women who were with me as friends and enormously skilled professional assistants. They kept me going through 2 elections and multiple crises, both personal and professional. And there's no better description of what they meant to me than to tell you that I couldn't have done it without them. Nor could I have done the quality of work that I aspired to do without the remarkable assistance of the wonderful group of men and women who were my law clerks over the years. I'd like to have Marjorie and May and the law clerks who are here stand, please, so that we can acknowledge you all. Thank you all for being here. I hope I didn't do too much to upset your lives. And aren't I lucky that Geraldine Ford and I were girlfriends before they were making movies about things like that? Tim Baughman, of course, is the incarnation of the dream that Terry and I had for excellence in the prosecutor's office. And Jim Ryan is the towering intellect who just inspired the discussions that made me relish being on the Supreme Court after years of a kind of intellectual isolation on the federal court as one person making decisions. The opponent in an election I came to value as among my most trusted and esteemed colleagues, Bob Griffin and Michael Kavanaugh, my best buddy on the court. A tad irreverent he is, which I love, but a man who is so decent that he's incapable of doing harm. Terry and I are honored at the presentations that each of you have made. Sitting justices like portrait presentations, even when they run over long, and my remarks will be brief, but these are great occasions. Investitures are fun too. They are victory parties in essence, but these are celebrations of the past that represent the completion of political life. And I always thought as I watched from the justice's position these portrait presentations of the analogs in my own life to the lives of those who were being honored by their portrait being presented. I always thought of the supporters, the political supporters, who had brought me to the position where I was. I thought also, of course, and most importantly, of my family and my friends who have stood by me for so many years and who have helped me in every way and who continue to brighten all the days of my life. Could I ask my family and all my family to stand, please, so you can all be recognized. Thank you. Thank you. My father's with us today, and I'm so happy he could join us. He is 94. I'd like to thank also, of course, and honor all those with whom I served. I began my service with Justice Brennan Williams, and I served with Dennis Wayne Archer and Charles Levin, who kept my little gray cells in a state of constant ferment, with Conrad Mallett, with Betty Weaver, with Cliff Taylor, with Marilyn Kelly, and also, of course, with Justices Ryan and Brickley and Riley, my comrade in arms, and Griffin and company of these people. The chance to have an ongoing dialogue, the opportunity to perhaps persuade that effective law enforcement was compatible with fair treatment for accused defendants. I do want to say about Jim Blanchard that I never could understand why being pro-law enforcement wasn't a good position for a Democrat to take. Neither did Jim. He was the first Democratic office holder that I knew of who was pro-victim and pro-law enforcement. And that's, of course, why we were great supporters of his. Well, at the conclusion of a process that could itself be several chapters in the annals of the Historical Society, and at the conclusion of this chapter in my life, I come to the point that I always told lawyers they would come to and needed to prepare for. And that is why, that is the hardest question. In other words, every lawyer needs to be prepared to answer the hardest question that could be put by any justice or any judge. You're not prepared to argue a case until you have pursued an issue to that point. And so the hardest question for me, as I thought about why I wanted to be a judge after John O'Meara and Julia Darlow had suggested that I might become a federal judge, I chanced upon these words the evening before my interview with Senator Don Regal. They're the words of Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. And when the question was put to me by Don Regal, as I knew it would be, why do you want to be a federal judge? I answered with Holmes' words, that a man or a woman must be involved in the action and passion of his time, or stand in peril of being judged never to have lived at all. On the day that I stood before this court to take the oath of office as a Michigan Supreme Court justice, I asked the same question of myself. Why did I want to be a justice of the Michigan Supreme Court? And the answer, of course, was Holmes' answer. But today, thanking everyone in this room and so many more people for having given me the opportunity, the marvelous opportunity, to be part of the action and passion of this time. Someone who is a former colleague and for whom I have deep respect, Mike Murray of our wonderful commissioner's office, and they and their staffs, the State Court Administrator's Office and their staff, and the Commissioner's Office, and all the staff of the court were so supportive and so helpful that no ceremony should ever be held without mentioning what an invaluable contribution they made to my life. The question that Mike suggested was, how would you like to be remembered? Ask yourself, how would you like to be remembered? Well, I've read some newspaper articles that characterized me as a liberal on civil rights and workers' rights, and I'm proud to claim that reputation. But in the end, I hope I will be remembered for the following. I'd like to be remembered by my children and my husband as a pretty good mom and a pretty good wife. I'd like to be remembered by my grandchildren, including the new grandchild that we are awaiting, whose name is going to be Carrie Patricia. I'd like to be remembered by my grandchildren as a little bit better than an average granny. And I'd like to be remembered by my colleagues on the court as honest and guileless, even naive perhaps. I'd like to be remembered too as smart and tough. And I'd like to be remembered as funny, because I love having fun. But most of all, I'd like to be remembered for the real reason that I came to the court. I'd like to be remembered as someone who was a trial judge who never forgot that the criminal justice process must never forget about victims of crime. That's what I came to the court to try to have an influence on. And I think that I've left some footprints in the sand because of the opportunity you gave me toward advancing that objective. The poet Archibald MacLeish said in words that are very appropriate to close this program, "The one force in the world which can claim the revolutionary title, the one force which can claim to move in the direction of life, is the force that Jefferson put into words. Later Americans, it is true, have betrayed that force, both in terms and actions, but the living seed remains. The seed remains and grows. It is this seed, this influence, this force of revolution, which is the living thing in the Republic. Without it, the United States is so much land, so many people, such an accumulation of wealth. With it, the United States is a stage upon the journey of mankind. How blessed we are to have been part of the journey. It's appropriate also, I think, to close my part of the ceremony with the words we now use in our church in Milford to open every Sunday service, and with the words that are used to open every federal court in this land that we love. God bless America, and God save this honorable court. Thank you.
The other side of the aisle.
Thank you, Justice Boyle, for your beautiful remarks this afternoon. And thank you, Judge Boyle. Thanks to the portrait artist who has prepared this most magnificent portrait of Patricia Boyle that will add to the 77 portraits in the Supreme Court's collection and that will shortly hang in the courtroom of the Supreme Court. Justice Kavanaugh is going to give some remarks shortly on behalf of the court, but I take this moment to accept the portrait formally on behalf of the court, and at least to just say one or two words to you, Pat. Tim Boffman said he and I were babies when we joined the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, and truth be told, I still had acne, and Terry Boyle would come into my office and lecture me about how to be cured of acne. So that was a good long time ago. It is All Saints' Day, as Justice Ryan said, and I thought this morning about St. Augustine's prayer, "Late have I loved thee." And I thought, Patty, about you, that's not so true, because long have we loved you. You have had every attribute that St. Augustine might describe as a happy life, and the metaphysical virtues, I think, are appropriate to talk about you today, what you did on our court and who you are, not just in the history of Michigan, but as a human being. And that is that you are a seeker of truth and a lover. And those things make you so worthy of who you've been to our court and who you've been in Michigan history. And for all those things, I thank you. There are only There are only 6 women who have served on the Michigan Supreme Court. 3 of them are sitting here. 2 of you, Justice Riley and Patty, are in the audience. And Justice Coleman isn't here today, but now all 6 of us will be in the courtroom. And every day we will be able to look at your beautiful portrait and Justice Riley and Mary Coleman and have mercy on those poor lawyers. I read today before I came to this ceremony of your swearing in, and I do know that the spirit of G. Menon Williams is in this court as he presided. And shall I say, on behalf of our court, from an unbroken line of Chief Justices, of our great respect and love for you, and how grateful we are that you served with us. Thank you so much. And at this time, I would like to call on my colleague, Michael Kavanaugh, to accept officially, on behalf of the court, and to commemorate his term of service with you, Justice Boyle.
Thank you, Chief Justice. This is really a great day. We're here to honor a great justice. I have to note it was good to see our old colleague and Patty's sparring partner, Chuck Levin, arrive. Nothing changes. fashionably late. And I don't really want to question the accuracy of any of your comments, Jim Ryan. But I think you'd be the first to admit that any conversation, the recounting of any conversation that took place on St. Patrick's Day is somewhat suspect. A long time ago, the Roman statesman Cicero said, "We're in bondage to the law in order that we may be free." Now, when Cicero spoke of bondage, surely he was referring to the obligations that the law places on us as citizens. We all must obey the law. As judges, though, the law holds us in a different sort of bondage. Not only must our decisions comport with the law, but we must give our lives to the law. Being a judge, I suggest, is an all or nothing proposition. The best judges give it everything they have. They love their families, but the law wrings them dry. And so we come to the great justice whom we are honoring today. This is the woman who finished first in her class at this law school while raising young children. This is the woman who was instrumental in converting an ancient, unwieldy body of rape law into the nuanced and effective criminal sexual conduct statute that, as Tim Boffman had mentioned, has been a model for reform throughout the nation. This is the woman who, after only 2 years on the Recorder's Court, was voted by the lawyers practicing in that court, both prosecutors and defense, as #1 in knowledge of the law, #1 in work habits, #1 in courtesy, and #1 overall. This is the woman who found herself already enshrined in the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame barely halfway through her professional career. This is excellence. But Patty, yours wasn't the excellence of a solo flight. You brought the rest of us along with you. At one time or another, we have all seen persons whose accomplishments separate them from others. They really kind of soar alone. It was never that way with you. The whole court got better when you came. And having served throughout your time on the court, I can testify to your skills and diligence that allowed, in fact, really compelled the rest of us to try and keep up. Of course, there were those Tupperware times when we couldn't keep up because we weren't around. Now, for those of you not privy to that little inside information, there's a story to that Tupperware reference. When Patty was first on the court, and our court was holding its Detroit meetings in the Lafayette building, in an office located directly across the hall from Patty's own office, she had circulated her very first majority opinion, which after several revisions she believed was due to be signed up at that day's conference. The agenda for the conference was nearing completion when we reached her opinion, and she was elated when, after very brief discussion, the justices indicated they were ready to agree with her if she would just make a few very minor changes. She hurried across the hall to her office, had her secretary make the changes, and returned to the conference room. She was astounded to find that the room was empty, save for the presence of one rather embarrassed-looking staff person who had obviously been left behind to advise her that the justices had left for the day because they had a prior commitment. When she pressed for details, he broke down, confessed, knowing she hadn't been invited, that the men had left to play golf. She went right back to her office, and before she could think too much, she dictated a formal memo to each justice, which read as follows. On today's date, you unfortunately had to leave conference early because of a prior commitment. I think it only fair to advise you that at the next week's conference, I similarly will have to leave early as I am attending a Tupperware party at Mary Coleman's house. My staff still remembers that memo. For 16 years, you brought your best to the conference table every single week. It was a pleasure to be on the same side of the case as you were. And for those who really enjoy a challenge, it could almost be a pleasure to be on the opposite side. Your excellence kept us all engaged and at our best. That's why Judge Fikens, having lost you as a federal judge, came to see you take the oath of office as a justice of the Michigan Supreme Court. And that is why he stood that day to tell us, I know that our court is diminished. He wasn't telling us that your departure had left him one judge short. He was telling us what we soon would learn for ourselves. Your presence makes a whole court better, and it made this state a better place. The CSC law alone would be the accomplishment of a lifetime for most lawyers, but for you it was only the beginning. No serious student of the law can doubt the enormous impact of your presence on this court. Now, I had gone back through the minutes and dug out your investiture, which you've already alluded to, that quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes that you asked just be updated to change the gender, where Holmes said, a man must involve himself in the life and passion of his times or stand in peril of being judged never to have lived at all. You told us that day you wanted to be such a woman involved in the life and passion of her times, and you were. You said you hoped to do so to the satisfaction of this court and the people of Michigan, and you did. Your 16 years on this court have led to a well-deserved retirement with Terry and with your children and grandchildren, but don't forget what you told the Free Press 18 years ago. You're quoted as saying, my career is a perfect lesson in why you shouldn't plan ahead. So don't get too comfortable, whether writing or teaching or appearing as counsel or serving as mentor. Your presence will continue to elevate all those who come in contact with you. You carry a contagious strain of excellence, and we are all the better for it. Your talents are immense, your warmth and joy always a support. We will hang this portrait surely in a decent place of honor. God bless you.
Before we adjourn and before I call on Reverend John Harris for the benediction, let me repeat and advise you that Justice and Judge Boyle have invited each and every one of you to come to Opus 1 for a little refreshment and to hear the rest of Terry's stories. You all know where Opus 1 is, but it's right down by St. Peter and Paul, Kitty Carr on Larnard. And now, Reverend Harris, will you give us the benediction, please?
Justices. Pat, you explained to your august gathering of friends and the Supreme Court of Michigan that each Sunday morning we begin by singing God Bless America. And you invited me to come to this wonderful presentation and suggested to me that I conclude this with a benediction that I recite every Sunday morning at the conclusion of our service. And these words are the oldest written words from the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew translates into English, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine down upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you, everyone, for coming together for this wonderful special session of our court. This court now stands adjourned.